I am happy to welcome you to the 8th episode of our series on Colombia's presidential elections. Throughout this series, we have engaged with leading voices from multiple sectors to explore the principles and key questions surrounding the so-called political center, the space with which nearly 40% of Colombians identify. Today, we reflect on what we have learned so far in this process, particularly in light of the March 8th primary elections, regarding the positions and issues that define the center and why securing this vote has become a key element of electoral campaigns. It is my pleasure to introduce now today's speakers. Jennifer Pedraza, Senator-elect, member of Congress, Dignity and Commitment Party. And Juan Espinal, Senator-elect, as well, member of Congress, Democratic Center Party. I also need to mention the sad news that Cathy, Juvinao, member of the Green Party, will not be able to join us today, and we will give the mic to our distinguished host, Sandra, Borda, professor and researcher at Universidad de los Andes, and Ken Frankel, president of the Canadian Council for the Americas. Ken, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you everyone for being here with us. Today is indeed an important moment at the phase of the presidential election in Colombia. I want to start with Jennifer, if I may, and the question is, what percentage of the electorate views your campaign as representing the center vote? Oh, right. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you for considering us and allowing us to be present in these many different spaces. Well, how many votes are we fighting for? I think the electorate result that we had in Colombia in March shows a tension level in the political forces in Colombia and in the population. And that brought us an oversimplified message for Colombia. And it's like saying, this is my friend, this is not my friend. And that does not take into account the different nuances in political posture, in political approaches, and political positioning. I consider myself to be left-wing, but I'm not part of the Pacto Histórico, which is a left-wing party in Colombia. And I feel there are so many differences with the political project that our president Gustavo Petro is bringing forward. So I think the electoral and political and organizational positioning is a challenge, and that comes from the resources and the idea of the voter understanding left-wing and right wing, if we want to call it that. So this tension has been the result, even if people do acknowledge themselves as center, one of the big problems that we had was counting on this center, this proposal of a center, and making it understand that we have a different political proposal. It's a wide spectrum. Juan Carlos knows that would have been a different party, and Catherine Juvinao, who saw it. People have had taken their distance from the political project with Petro, and we had spoken here at length about what has been done wrong at that moment. And I think if we go back to that elections, I think we have acknowledged the right problems, but we weren't able to solve them. So I think in Colombia, the majority of people do acknowledge themselves of being center, but that is not something we see in election day. People feel like our message is not easy and simple enough for people to decide that they want to align with the center, and people end up choosing whether it is right wing or left wing. Jennifer, um, to offer a follow-up to Ken's question, and before passing the mic to Juan, I would like to explain to the audience a specific situation that I would like to question. I'd love to know how you think about solving that situation concerning the first round of voting of the election. And that will be the result of this first primary tour that we had recently. So you're part of the coalition where we have the Mira, Nuevo Liberalismo, and Dignidad, which is the party you belong to. Now, this coalition supposedly, actually not even supposed to, I feel like it's defined, that is supporting the option of having Sergio Fajardo as a president candidate. But this was also part of the center right wing coalition who chose Paloma Valencia and Juan Manuel Oviedo as the presidential ticket. So there's like a tension, almost a rupture, that I would like to know how we could solve, because the impression I'm left with is that in this first round, this shouldn't be much of a problem. But if statistics are right, and if that center right coalition with Paloma passes the first round, maybe they will. Could it be possible that you, and I'm speaking you with Mira and Dignidad, will you move towards that new coalition? Or what is the scenario that you're considering once we'll have the results of the first round? So sorry, of course. We're still in negotiations, so everything is allowed. So of course, the coalition idea is important because there's women involvement in it with full rights. So the Mira, Nuevo Liberalismo, and Dignity coalition, I feel like, is critical. And of course, there will be many aspects to mention that, but that conversation to consolidate a list for Congress has been parallel, but not in the presidential conversation. So we never thought about supporting Fajardo or Juan Manuel Galan. Why? Because there were two candidates for presidential elections in that coalition. Both took different paths. Juan Manuel decided to go with the Democratic Center, and that's something that I ask myself: how has the Pacto Histórico been saying for the last 4 years that there's no center, that the center is life, and now Juan Manuel created a coalition with the Democratic Party, with Paloma Valencia. Of course, he has the right to do that, but I'm very critical about it. And not just me, for those of us who want to create a different political project, that doesn't really make sense. So there has never been an agreement between Fajardo and Juan Manuel Galan concerning presidential elections. So of course, Juan Manuel will be measured, let's say, with the popular referendum, and the result will be critical. So now what I see is that part of the sector that are categorizing themselves as center, with Juan Manuel Oviedo appearing with the option of Paloma, well, it has been a way of giving a different shape to this candidacy for many people. That is still the candidacy of the Democratic Center. With Paloma Valencia, there are many topics still at debate. So there was no presidential agreement. We got there with different candidacy for the first round. And I feel like that will be mirrored in votes. Not having a unified, integrated proposal for candidacy will be a burden for the center. And we could consider other important perspectives. We could have. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Juan, to start with you, thank you for the patience. I'd love to ask the first question that I asked to Jennifer. What percentage is at play here? I have a newspaper here, El Tiempo, 2 weeks ago on Sunday. I read, we won't be able to win without the center. People would have no party, Paloma Valencia. So what do you understand with this? What does the Democratic Center understand with Paloma's candidacy about the center? Well, Ken, thank you very much. Greetings to Sandra and special greetings to Jennifer. I'm so happy that Jennifer has been elected senator to the Republic. And I want to mention two sides. Jennifer was elected the best representative of the chamber. And I think that is important. We have differences, but when the debate was serious, we both were there. When it was a technical, argumented debate, we were there, we were participating. It's so great that we will be meeting in the Senate, both of them. Thank you very much, Juan, for those words. No, of course, it's the truth. I always say that. See, this is a great first step for reconciliation in Colombia. Look at this. All right, Juan, go ahead. Well, I want to give some kind of context, a quick context. When Fajardo launched his candidacy for Medellin, he got great support of Uribism in Antioquia. And when there was continuity of Fajardo, he got support of the followers of Uribism. The President Uribe and his two sons did campaign with him in Medellin, and they're representing a center ideology, center left wing, but that was for Medellin. And I think that is the meeting point at national level, protection of democracy and freedom in our own country. That is why the message of the Democratic Center before and after the big referendum is from Sergio Fajardo to Abelard to Australia, understanding that all of the Democrats are more unified than ever, or should be, to defend democracy and freedom of our country. Now, they were saying that this big referendum was the referendum of 1%, and big surprise, we got a lot of votes. Paloma got more than 3 million votes at national level, consolidating herself as the only candidacy. Juan Manuel Oviedo was a surprise as well at the end of the day. And I think for most of us, it was a surprise. For some, it wasn't, because Juan Manuel was leading an important local campaign in Bogota, and that has been consolidating at national level. But it's also important to underline the democratic exercise of the big referendum. Cis pre-candidates are supposedly belonging to the center. We have Juan Manuel Gaviria, Enrique Peñalosa, Juan Manuel Galan, and Juan Manuel Oviedo, among others. Of course, with this decision ends up being a political decision, stating that Juan Manuel will be the presidential ticket of Paloma Valencia. Now, the message, in my opinion, has been clear and direct. Center and right, even center left, to fight and win against petrism needs to be unified. We have no idea what will happen after the first round, but I'll repeat it. If in some circumstances the winner of the first round were to be Dr. Sergio Fajardo, we would be there to support a candidacy to the second round. And I personally believe that the center of the country, and I understand that somehow the positioning and the thinking process of Jennifer, and I've been speaking about this with many other colleagues belonging to the center, independently of Daniel Carvalho, is what has happened with the independents, because the low participation and the bare minimum in terms of support has shown us a very important debate as independents, but also doing opposition to the current government. So I believe that there's a political reality here, which is in the midst of polarization, the voter, based on public opinion, will participate in a scenario of clear positioning and clear decision making. And I think that was the result we got. The Pacto Histórico and the Democratic Center got the biggest voting to the Congress in the Republic. But I also think that the combination of different political positioning and different ideologies of center and center right made this great event have an important result. Now, summing up what I want to say, I believe that today, Juan Paloma Valencia and Juan Daniel Oviedo, independently of the fact that they're the Democratic Center, even if she is the senator of this political period, they were able to consolidate a message, and they're succeeding in captivating the votes of the political center of the country. We could start giving numbers with Sandra, with Jennifer, we could, but I believe that what we would try to do is capturing the voter, which is not just the political center. I think the center left might also be feeling identified with the different the candidacy of the government, the candidate for the continuity, and the candidate that represents the far left. This is what is happening in the country. That is why I think the ticket with Paloma and Juan Daniel Oviedo, we have differences in ideology, and there will be a very interesting conversation at national level, especially for the youth, for the entrepreneurs, for women, for human rights activists who are being represented by Juan Manuel Oviedo, but also being represented with the Democratic and Ideological Center. All right, I will ask a different question then. I'd like to be able to define which are the lines, the positions, the principles that we could like to call center or center left. Now, I'm just mentioning this to give an easier way out for voters, not a way out, but like a way of identifying themselves, of positioning themselves. Because I think the big worry here is that the voter loses the idea of where these new coalitions are going. And this is, of course, the impact and the repercussions of new crises in political parties. So I can say that I could, for example, be a left-wing person, but there are some differences with the government, with how everything has been managed. And Jennifer also mentioned this, transmitting this exercise to a different exercise, which would be center right or a further away left-wing ideology. So if we wanted to identify which are the lines that separate your positioning to the positioning of this new political power, where would you identify these lines? Well, I think, Sandra, that there are many topics and many different lines to mention here. And I could be very practical in my answer. The answer is that we're in the middle of a democratic exercise to save something basic that we've always had in our country, which is freedom based on democracy. And I think this is the most important point of all. Among all of the Democrats of this country, we should unite to save the democracy in Colombia. And then we will make decisions facing the topics that separate or unite us. I will give you an example about this. Concerning energy security, with the ideological center of the country, there are differences. And there were deep differences 3 or 4 years ago when I was in the middle of a very technical and respectful debate in Congress. We were speaking about natural gas, oil, etc., and the different commodities. So at that moment, Juan Jorge Robledo, 3 years afterwards, much more balanced, almost getting close to a debate that would have never been thought about 3 years ago in the Congress. And I'm just giving you an example here. I'm speaking about fracking. Now, second topic, human rights. Now, as I was telling Sandra recently, off topic, as we say, the labels have hurt us so much. They've been telling us that we don't respect human rights, mobilizations, unemployment. It's a right that all workers have, and it's very important in the constitutional legal framework. Human rights are always to be respected. Now, sometimes we need to be stronger under the legitimate defense of the country when we have demonstrations. Those moments end up being scenario of something else, of private property, of human rights, of different kind of contexts. For example, we have strikes. What about the strikes, the mining strikes? That is already happening, and sometimes that turns out to be labeled as terrorism. So people end up saying, take the army out of the city to stabilize the city again and establish the order again. And we here saying as well, no, because that will end up fighting against human rights. So I want to be concrete in my answer, and I thought I could have brought this example in to show what this political center, sometimes they put us together with the far right, and that's not the case. Some topics are not far right or far left or center. Those are topics that we need to meet each other at: energy security, basic security, health system, human rights, workers' rights. I think we could all meet at a balance center, at a meeting point, having a conversation. We don't have to agree on it, but we need to have a meeting point to start having a constructive debate. I'm sorry, Juan, but I think that is a very interesting question. What about Abelardo? What kind of differences do you identify considering Abelardo's proposal? I think it was a great question. I'm sorry I jumped in. I wanted to say that. Well, Jennifer, I think Abelardo showed himself as a mix of Bukele and Donald Trump on some topics, right? There's like a combination of elements here. And I think I've always been in the representative chamber trying to be integral, all right, without being a controversy. I've been speaking on the street, so I went on the street and I was speaking with a guy asking whether I am agreeing with weed consumption. No. With abortion. No. And they asked me, where is freedom then? Unfortunately, we got an audio problem with Juan Espinal, who seemed to have been frozen in a very critical point of his sentence. Let me notify him of this technical problem. Oh, right, he already knows. He's not connected anymore. Well, I was thinking about this panel. One of the TikTokers and most known streamer in Colombia had a violent live session with the president, and he did one TikTok with Petro and one TikTok with Uribe. If the whole conversation only focuses on those two family names, it will be so complicated to think about the idea of proposing different things. So an option I'm thinking about is generational change. So meaning that there will be new political leaders appearing on the scene of new family names, not always the same people, the same families. That is the challenge we have now. Jennifer, Juan mentioned, well, he explained his opinion on security with energy related security, human rights. Are there points of convergence with your opinion, the way in which he introduced that idea? Does that coincide with your idea of what the center might be. Juan, thank you for joining again. Well, unfortunately, we got power outage in our neighborhood, but I'm with data now. No worries, Juan, at all. So the question we have for Jennifer is, well, listening to your opinion on energy-related security and basic security and human rights, I was questioning, is there a set of points of convergence with your different opinions of what center might look like concerning those topics? Well, I think there are many important meeting points with the whole of the political spectrum. And I'll give you an example. I'm the author of Article 86 and 87 of the 30th law, which is better scientific financing of the high education. And the Chamber of Representatives supported this project with political center, etc. So I believe that we had practical experience of how vision concerning child marriage prohibition, for example, there was a debate about that on feminine mutilation as well. We have some common points among the political spectrum of the agenda of what we should be fighting about. Same thing about access to resources, on price, raising prices for oil, for fuel, raising cost of life. That is something that is happening in Chile as well. Well, we should be working about oil pricing reduction, your fuels. So we were able to have a conversation with people of the center and of different parties and also the population because criminalization is rising, etc. So I feel that with the whole political spectrum, we have some meeting points to give you a kind of a spicy thing to speak about. Well, Paloma Valencia was the only one who opposed herself to the project of the Law 30. And I think that is our main difference with Paloma, the role of the education, what public education can do in the country. I'm defending a dignified financing of public education, considering that it is the main axe of development, of national development. I think we have a huge difference with what Paloma Valencia, which is the presidential candidate, is thinking about that. Now, I wanted to add something. I don't know what Sandra thinks about that, or Can thinks about that, or Juan even thinks about that. People said it's so important that Paloma can be the vice president of someone who gets the voting of the center, and that's true. But my feeling is that there has not been a movement of the right towards the center. So what about presidential candidate stating their ideology of the center? I feel like they're aligning more with the right ideology. So they didn't get to the center with the values corresponding. I feel like everyone is going to different directions. Paloma is going for Abelardo's votes and so on and so forth. So on a program level, people are asking what is being proposed. Yes, and I wanted to add something on that just to make sure that I'm I'm certain I understood right. There are so many declarations being done later that I don't know who says what. But at one point she was asked about abortion and she said, I and the political power are against the abortion. But she added that there's an institutional decision that has been made on that topic. So she said she will respect the decision, even if I'm against it. But since there's an institutional decision, that's what has been decided, and that's it. Because it was adopted by the Constitutional Court. And that's what brings me to ask you both, what's the limit of this process of building coalitions in the center in the midst of this party crisis? Shouldn't there be more clarity for voters? Let's think about a right-wing voter, a voter that got closer and closer to the Democratic center. I'm not speaking about far right, I'm speaking about the normal right, the old-time right. Maybe this voter got closer to the center, thinking about social topics, the gay marriage, um, trans rights, what the Yankees would call this social agenda. How are you processing this topic? I can understand it myself. I know that people can have a different personal positioning, but at the same time, simultaneously acknowledging that institutions have given a different result, and that has to be respected, that difference, that institutional decision. Now, I'm asking, what kind of process happens in the brain of a voter? Because I feel like it's complicated for me to understand what the function that political parties used to do, which we're helping out the voters, like telling the voter, if you're interested in this topic, you're going this way. If you are aligning with this other positioning, it's on this other way. So I don't know what kind of coalition, what kind of work these coalitions are doing in clarifying these doubts to voters. Off topic, I was telling Juan, it is so interesting to think about solving the scenario by creating existence of a political power among the different ideas. So it's about not having to be homogeneous in terms of ideology and having a debate, a conversational space. On the other side, concerning specific positioning on concrete topics, my question is still there. What is this creating in the brains of voters? How will this be translated in a specific concrete decision showing the preferences, political preferences of every voter? Well, Sandra, I think what we're living through in this government with this Congress, and allow me to say, is a mess. Now, no Conservative Party voter would end up thinking that it would get a coalition with Gustavo Petro, a party that defends right wing democracy, so family, anti abortion, no cannabis legalization, no euthanasia. So, as we saw with Jennifer, we saw a Conservative Party completely nailed down in front of Petro government. That's not the beginning of the confusion. Is that what you're saying? The confusion happened and started a while back. Indeed, yes, we could start having this long thinking process about which political parties have doctrinal positioning. Our party, Democratic Center, have a body and have content, and we have defined that very well in our statute as political party. Now, from that, we need to consider that there was a government with President Uribe during 8 years with critics, with successes, with failures. Of course, that's obvious. Now, currently, nowadays, I'd say as of today, the political parties, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, the AU, the Green Party, are individually aligning with some specific campaigns, individual alignment with the campaign of Fajardo or Paloma Valencia. Same thing. It was unthinkable before to imagine a coalition with the Mira Party, with Dignity, and with neoliberalism. Ideologically, they have a lot of conflicts. Jennifer defended that in Congress, and the counterpart was the Representative Hilma, of the Mira party. Now, what I'm saying with this is it sounds like it's a big mess, or it's fair to ask, what's the true intention below all of it? And I'll conclude with this. There's one important point, Sandra, and I'll mention it, is the risk of the country that we might end up having, defending democracy and defending the freedom of our Colombian people. That's what has been said this week. They will continue with the same economical positioning that Gustavo Petro defended. And we know what that is about: breaking fiscal rules, a government with way too much bureaucracy, rising external debt. From the academia, you have a lot of clarity over that. I think it's a worrying point for us. Fajardo's worried about it, Velardo's worried about it, Paloma's worried about it. But I think that meeting point goes beyond some positioning and some ideology, specific ideology that one might defend as a person and as a political person. And I'm mentioning the positioning that Jennifer has been defended and that we found in a debate in the Congress. So why not, among all of those differences, and we can use the example of Paloma and Oviedo, why shouldn't we unite ourselves in order to defend democracy? And I'm sure that at the end of August that will happen, because we need to guarantee independence, democracy, and freedom for all Colombians. And I'll be very blunt about this. With Fajardo, with Paloma, or with Abelardo, we know that democracy and institutionalization will not be in risk. The worry is the candidacy of the continuity, which is Dr. Ivan Cepeda. In that case, there's a deep worrying. And no doubt we will get at some point with Caterina Miranda, Alejandro Gaviria, Daniel Gomez, Julia Miranda will get to the campaign of Paloma and Juan Daniel Oviedo. They will not be getting to the Democratic Party, the Democratic Center. That's not the case. They're getting to a proposal where there's a difference in topics, but there's also a national level conversation where everyone has their own space and voice. So the idea and the premise here is defending democracy and freedom. So abortion, euthanasia, whatever else, we can be debating that in the Congress, but it's important to put them on the table and saying, among the different ideological differences and the different topics in our countries in the 21st century, two people representing a political party like Juan Paloma or Juan Daniel representing the political center together with other people, of course, they succeeded in unifying themselves and creating a conversation at national level. Thank you, Juan. Jennifer. Well, I think that Sandra, you mentioned a point, an important point, which is sometimes programs are too abstract for voters. They become too abstract for voters to actually understand what is going on, the right, the left, the declaration, what people are thinking, what the coalition is thinking. Messages are so clear when, Paloma says, I'm against abortion, then she said it's an institutional decision, and that's important to respect that. But it's not just that, it's about penalization of a whole different set of important things. So it's about understanding what the positioning is, the political center, the impact, but the rest of the projects that are in the middle of it, we need to have some positioning. Otherwise, people will not have clarity over what is to be voted. And I think that is what happened in the last elections. There will be no clarity over what moves candidates and what they're proposing. I think our proposal is centered and focused on this specific topics. It has been difficult to position ourselves in that spectrum because it's about saying, I'm left, but I'm center, but I don't defend a Christian-based country, but I do defend this other ideologies. So it's about not just limiting ourselves to the presidential candidacy. For example, Dignity and Engagement, Dignidad, Compromiso, is a party that makes me think about building a center-left party, an alternative way of representing people that are lost among the different programs to find a unity in one proposal. We need to define in our case what points represent what we think and what we will defend as center. But at the same time, we need to count on flexibility because that's what center is also about. Luckily enough, there's not a patriarch here saying, this is what we're defending, this is what we're not defending. That's not the case. Everyone can make their own decisions in a free way. Also because center is made of leaderships of their own presence. The lists are open. I think that's important in terms of consolidating a proposal. I cannot think will abandon that. I'm sorry that's an old school, but I think we should create a party, we should write a program, we should be unified and defend unity, and we should show and speak to people that could be aligned on our values, like, for example, the animal defense, the women rights. There has been a huge difference between the ideologies on current politics about that. So I think to move forward, we need to make sure that this is clear. Our proposal is to reunite these voices and build a statute and a party that responds to that. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Sandra, if I'm allowed, I have a quick question for Juan. If I'm not mistaken, Juan, at one point you described Abelardo as a combination of Bukele and Donald Trump or something like that. And at the same time, you're speaking about democracy and freedom. Do you think that Abelardo represents a true center representation of democracy and freedom, speaking about Bukele and Trump? Well, honestly, I don't know a lot about Abelardo. In my life, I think I crossed paths twice with him. I'm not close to him. I got to know him during the political campaign on social networks. I've learned what he thinks on social networks. Now I'm speaking about him considering the spectrum, the environment, his way of showing himself, of presenting himself at national spaces. I don't think Abelardo would put in risk democracy and freedom in our country. I think this country has a strength, is political and institutional and democratic strength to succeed in avoiding that happening with any president of the republic. Now, I'm not sure whether we will be able to succeed in this. With Gustavo Petro, we were able to contain many things in Congress. And I'm not speaking about the Democratic Center. I'm speaking about opposition, whether that is actual opposition or independent opposition like Carvalho, like Miranda. We all ended up in the same group of people to contain the impacts, not to have absolute majorities running out the possibility of a debate. In some opportunities, they were able to do that, but in many others, we were able to contain that. In reduced positioning, so that's where we were able to balance out the different situations. In the Congress, independently of who the president in charge is, that is the role of the opposition. The Congress will always be playing an important role. And it was my turn during the Duque mandate as well. They were able to do opposition to contain some of the negative impacts. I think Abelardo would not put at risk democracy and freedom. Now, that said, in our party, we have something important about choosing what we align with. Some people, like we had Gabriel Centro, for example, that at one point was like, okay, I'm taking distance from this positioning. Of course, we make some decisions. Security, energy related security. We need to have fracking happening in this country. Yes, because we need to avoid power outages. We need to avoid deepening in that concerning fuel stocks, etc. Because Gustavo Petro made the absurd decision of not signing a contract for hydrocarbon exploration. So that is, the left-wing agenda in the world. Well, no, in Lula signed almost 200 contracts of hydrocarbons in his country, and they will be doing fracking, which is in a country that is hugely dependent on that, like most countries, and we're risking power outage, power rationing. And it's important to underline that. What do we need to keep moving forward? Energy. And that is the debate that needs to be on the table, but with tranquility and with technical arguments. And I will give you an example. For the last 3 years, I've been working on the project of nuclear energy. When Petro came in, I told them I will never be able to propose this project. We will only be able to present this on the historical pact party, and that was when we presented that project. There was almost all of the Congress there. When we found a meeting point among the technical debate, everything is much easier to have at Congress level. When we get to the nuance, to the deep ideological difference nuance, that will turn into a huge catastrophe in the Congress. But I don't think Abelardo will be a risk for freedom and democracy. I don't think so. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time. Jennifer, you just have the right to quickly answer to that. I don't want to answer to Espinal, but I do think Abelardo is a great risk and threat to democracy and freedom. I think for those people who have a different vision, I don't believe people saying, I don't think he will do everything that he says he will. I mean, his campaign. But that is exactly what people thought about Donald Trump. And now he's signing decrees and breaking global order. I think the fact that we're considering a secular country has also turned into a huge problem. He's considering his own vision on religion. So I think the attacks to Prince, which is a common element, which have also been undertaken by Gustavo Petro, this whole reference to mafia, this arbitrarity of conflicts. I think it's important to underline this because it goes against democracy, goes against conversations that respect the positioning of others. The campaign he brought forward, so the mentioning of, and actually the violence, the political and verbal violence, which he thinks are nowhere to be, they won't be remembered. But at the same time, the willingness that I have is that we have a strong democracy, and so that won't happen. But a president with high popularity in a presidential country with the international context we find ourselves in, which is high authority regimes at global level, I do think Abelardo would be a threat, not just for democracy, but also for the human rights wins that we had in the last few years. Power separation, press freedom. Of course, I would be opposition to Abelardo's government, and I would be worried about the way he treats people who think differently. Last comment. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Ken and Sandra, for this excellent conversation. And thank you all for being with us today. We invite you to follow us on social media to stay informed about upcoming episodes in this series on Colombia's political center, as well as other events in our report on the need for a new Canadian strategy toward Latin America and the Caribbean. You will also find the video of this event, and the website is ccacanada.com. Wishing you all a great Easter or spring break. Thank you very much for joining this conversation, and till next time.